The night they carried Amanda into the forbidden forest and left her there to die, she did not scream. She did not beg. She just opened her eyes in the dark, looked up at the moon through the thick leaves above her head, and whispered one name, the name of the river goddess who had owned her since she was 9 years old. And somewhere deep in the forest, something moved. Amanda was 9 years old the first time she went to the river alone. Her mother had died 2 rainy seasons before, and her father, Chukuma, had taken a new wife named Ngozi, who had no love for another woman's child. That morning, Ngozi had poured cold water on Amanda's sleeping mat and told her to go fetch firewood from the edge of the forest before sunrise. No food, no sandals, just go. Amanda walked barefoot past the cassava farms, past the old men sitting under the okwa tree, all the way to the river they called Olachi, the river that speaks. She sat down at the edge of the water and cried, not loudly, but quietly, the way children cry when they have learned that no one will come. The river was dark green and slow that morning, and the air smelt of wet earth and something sweeter that Amanda could not name. She was still crying when the water moved, and the woman rose from it. The woman from the river was not dressed the way living people dress. She wore white cloth that did not drip even though she had just come out of the water, and her hair was braided with white cowrie shells. Her skin was the deep brown of river clay, and her eyes were the color of the water itself, green and shifting and impossible to hold. She looked at Amanda the way a person looks at someone they have been waiting for, and she sat down beside her on the bank as if they were old friends. She told Amanda her name was Idemili, and that she had watched Amanda suffer for 2 years. She said she knew what it was to be a girl with no one to protect her. Then she reached into the folds of her white cloth and pulled out a string of blue and white beads, each one carved from river stone, each one warm to the touch, despite coming from the cold water. She placed them around her wrist and told her what they would do. They would protect her from sickness, from evil, from the cruelty of people who meant to harm her. They would make her strong in ways she could not yet understand. But then Idemili took Amanda's small chain in her cool hand and looked her straight in the eye. She said, "If any man ever takes you as his wife and touches you as a husband touches a wife, the beads will not protect you anymore. The magic will turn. It will consume you from the inside, and you will die before the next full moon." Amanda, 9 years old and desperate and frightened, agreed without fully understanding what she was agreeing to. She tied the oath tight in her heart and went home. Years passed. Amanda grew. The beads worked the way Idemili had promised. When Ngozi tried to poison her food after a bitter quarrel, Amanda vomited the food out before it reached her blood. When a sickness spread through the village and took 3 children from their mothers, Amanda slept through it untouched. When the men who robbed travelers on the road between Umoka and the next village tried to stop her on her way to the market, something in her eyes made them step back without understanding why. People in the village began to notice that there was something different about Chukuma's daughter, something quiet and steady that made them uneasy in a way they could not explain. But Amanda carried the weight of the oath like a stone around her neck. Girls her age began to talk about the men they would marry, the children they would have, the houses they would build. Amanda listened and said nothing. She knew what her life was. She helped her father on the farm. She went to the river alone sometimes and sat by the bank, and though Idemili never rose again, Amanda felt that the goddess was listening. The beads were always warm on her wrist, warm and humming faintly like something alive. She kept them covered with cloth when she was around other people. The oath was her secret, and she guarded it the way you guard fire in the rain. Amanda was 19 when her father called her into his house with that particular look on his face, the one she had learned to fear more than any other, the one that came when he had been drinking palm wine and thinking about money. Ngozi was sitting in the corner with a small smile on her lips that she was trying to hide, which meant this was her idea. Chukuma sat Amanda down and told her about a debt. He said he had borrowed money from Chief Obiora of Oguta, a large amount to build a new house that was never finished, to buy a piece of land he never planted. The debt had grown. Chief Obiora had sent word that he would accept Amanda as a wife in place of payment. Chukuma said this as if it were a small thing, a practical matter, the kind of arrangement that happened in villages all the time. Amanda went very still. She told her father she could not marry. She did not explain why. She had never told anyone about the oath. She only said she could not. Her father laughed, not a kind laugh, and Ngozi stopped hiding her smile. Chukuma said the decision was already made, that a man's debts do not wait for a daughter's comfort, that Amanda should be grateful someone of Chief Obiora's standing was willing to take her. He told her to go and prepare herself. Amanda walked out of the house and went to the river. She sat by the bank for a long time. The beads on her wrist were hotter than she had ever felt, almost burning, as if Idemili herself was angry on her behalf. The water was still. No answer came. Amanda walked home in the dark, knowing that something terrible was coming, and knowing she was the only one who could stop it, and not yet knowing how. Chief Obiora's compound was large enough to be a small village on its own. There were 7 houses inside the walls, each for one of his wives, arranged in a circle around the main house where the chief slept and received visitors. Amanda arrived on a Tuesday morning in a new cloth Ngozi had bought her, not out of kindness, but because Ngozi did not want people saying she had sent her stepdaughter to a chief's house looking like a market woman. The compound was quiet when Amanda entered it from the gate, but she felt eyes on her from the moment she stepped through the gate. Behind curtains, around corners, the eyes of women who had been there longer and who already did not like what they saw. The 7 wives came to look at her before the sun was halfway across the sky. The first wife, Adaeze, was a wide-faced woman with a flat, cold manner of speaking, who had given the chief 4 sons and believed that gave her the right to run everything inside those walls. She looked Amanda up and down without greeting her and said to the other wives that she was too young and too pretty, and pretty girls with no mothers always caused trouble. The other wives took their positions behind Adaeze like birds on a wire, some silent, some murmuring agreement. One, the youngest wife, Chisom, looking at Amanda with something that was not quite hostility, but close enough. Amanda stood in the middle of them and said nothing. She had learnt a long time ago that in a room full of women who have decided to hate you, silence is the only armor that does not break. For 3 weeks, Amanda managed to avoid being alone with Chief Obiora. She was clever about it, always having a task, always being somewhere else, always having Chisom nearby or one of the older women from the chief's household who ran the kitchen.
Chief Obiora was not a young man. He was heavy and slow-moving and accustomed to women coming to him rather than running from him. He found Amanda's distance amusing at first, then irritating. He sent for her twice, and she came but sat near the door and answered his questions in short, polite sentences, and found reasons to leave before things could move in the direction he intended. It was Adaeze who ended it. Amanda came back to her room one evening to find Adaeze standing inside with the youngest wife and 2 of the others. Adaeze told Amanda that she had been watching her, that she had noticed the cloth she always kept on her left wrist, that a wife in this compound had no business keeping secrets. Before Amanda could move, the 2 younger wives grabbed her arms. Adaeze pulled back the cloth on Amanda's wrist and saw the beads. Her eyes changed. She had grown up hearing stories about river magic. Everyone in villages near water had. She knew what kind of beads those were the moment she saw them. She tore them from Amanda's wrist before Amanda could scream, and the string snapped. Beads rolled across the floor. Amanda felt it immediately. A cold rush through her body, like every warm thing inside her was suddenly extinguished. Then Adaeze told her that if she said one word about this to the chief, they would tell him Amanda was a witch. In this village, a woman called a witch by 7 wives had nowhere to go. 2 nights after the beads were taken, Amanda woke to the sound of cloth being pressed over her face. She fought, but there were too many of them. They had planned it carefully. Adaeze and 3 of the wives, plus the compound gate man who Adaeze had been paying for years. They wrapped Amanda in a mat, carried her out through the back of the compound in the dead hours of the night, and drove deep into the forest that stood behind the farmlands. The forest that the people of Oguta called Ajo here, the bad forest, where the soil was too dark and the trees grew too close together, and even hunters did not go alone. They dropped her there, still wrapped in the mat. Adaeze bent down close to Amanda's ear and told her that by morning the animals would have settled the matter, and that the chief would be told Amanda had run away like a foolish girl who did not know what was good for her. Amanda lay in the dark of the mat and listened to their footsteps fade. Then she lay still for a long moment and thought about dying. She was not afraid of it the way she might have been a year ago. What she felt was something colder and quieter than fear. It was grief, the kind that fills your chest until there is no room for anything else. She thought about her mother, she thought about the river, she thought about Idemili rising from the green water with wet cowrie shells in her hair, and she thought about 9-year-old Amanda agreeing to an oath she did not fully understand. Then she heard the sound. Not footsteps, something heavier, something that moved between the trees the way water moves around stone, fluid and certain, and very close. Amanda did not scream. She closed her eyes and waited. What found Amanda in the dark of the Ajo here was not an animal. It moved like one, heavy and silent and deliberate, but when it pulled the mat from her face and she looked up, she saw something that made no sense. It was large, roughly the shape of a man, but wrapped in something she could only describe as shadow, as if the dark itself had folded around a human body. It had eyes like amber in firelight. It looked at her for a long time without moving or speaking, and Amanda looked back with the same steadiness she had learnt at the river, because she had been alive long enough to know that the most dangerous things in the world are not the ones that move in the dark, they are the ones that smile in the daylight. The creature carried her to a shelter deep in the forest, not a rough hut, but something built with care and knowledge, with a raised floor and a fire that burned without smoke, and walls of woven branches so tightly made that no wind came through. It set her down gently and moved to the other side of the fire and said in a voice that was rough at the edges but completely human, "My name is Emeka." Amanda stared at him across the fire, and as the light moved, the shadow around him seemed to thin, and she could see more clearly. He was a young man, dark-skinned and broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that would have been easy to trust if not for the way the darkness clung to him like a second skin. He told her slowly, watching her face, that he was the second son of the Igwe of Oguta, the king's son, that 3 years ago a curse was put on him by a jealous elder who wanted the throne for his own son. The curse bound him to the forest and changed him at night to be something between a man and a shadow. He had been living in the Ajo here ever since. He had watched Umuoka and Oguta from the edges of the forest, and he had seen what was done to her. Amanda stayed in the forest for 7 days. On the 3rd day, Emeka brought her the beads. He had gone back to the compound at night. He moved through darkness as if he was part of it, and taken them back from Adaize's box without waking anyone. Amanda held them in her palm and felt them warm slowly, like a fire restarting from old coals. But they did not go back on her wrist. She understood now, in a way she had not understood at 9, that the beads were not just a gift, they were a leash, a claim. She had belonged to the river for 10 years, and the river had kept her safe, and the river had asked only one thing in return. She turned the beads over in her hands and thought about what kind of life she wanted and what kind of life she had been living. On the 7th night, Amanda walked alone to a stream that ran through the forest, a thin river, not the Great Olachi, but connected to it the way all water is connected. She sat at the edge and put her feet in. The water was cool. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the surface shifted, and she felt it. Not a presence exactly, but an attention. The river was listening. Amanda spoke to Idemili the way she had never spoken to her, not as a frightened child asking for protection, but as a grown woman who had nearly died and wanted to make a different kind of deal. She said she was grateful. She said the beads had kept her alive when nothing else would. But she said she could not live the rest of her life in a cage made of water and old magic. She placed the beads on the surface of the stream and let them go. They floated for a moment, and then the water took them down. The stream was still. The air was warm. Amanda felt the loss of the beads like a cold space where a fire had been. And then very slowly, she felt something else. Not the borrowed warmth of river magic, her own warmth, the kind that belongs to a person who had decided who they are. Amanda did not return to Chief Obiora's compound with grief or tears. She returned in the morning with Emeka at her side, and the sight of a man walking out of the Ajo here in broad daylight, his shadow curse thin in the sunlight but still visible enough for the compound workers to back away, was enough for Adaize's certainty to crack before Amanda said a single word.
Amanda went directly to the chief's main house and told him everything. Not gently, not carefully.
She told him about his first wife, about the 3 wives who helped, about the gate man, about what was done to her in the night. She spoke clearly and without shaking, and she told it in the order it happened, so there was no confusion about who did what. Chief Obiora was a man who cared about his power, and what he heard was that 4 of his wives had done something in his compound without his knowledge or permission. That was the part that mattered to him, that his household had acted without him. He called Adaeze in. What happened after that was for the chief and his wives to settle among themselves, and Amanda did not stay for it. She went back to Umuoka with Emeka, and she went to her father's house one more time. Chukuma was in the yard when she arrived. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has spent time convincing himself that what he did was reasonable, and who does not want to be reminded that it was not. Amanda told him 2 things. She told him his debt to Chief Obiora was settled. She had confirmed it with the chief before she left the compound, and she told him that she would not be coming back to this yard again. He tried to speak, and she did not wait for the words. She walked away from him the way she had walked away from the forest, not running, not looking back, just moving forward with the kind of calm that belongs to a person who has already survived the worst thing and come out knowing their own name. The curse on Emeka was broken 3 weeks later when Amanda walked with him to the palace, and he stood before the elder who had cast it and told him plainly and in front of witnesses what he had done. The elder had no power left. Curses cast in secret lose their strength when dragged into open air. Emeka stood in full sunlight that day, without a shadow that did not belong to him. As for Amanda and the river, Idemili never rose again. But sometimes, in the early morning when Amanda went to fetch water, the surface of the river moved in a way that had nothing to do with the wind, a small ripple spreading out from the center, the way water moves when something beneath it nods. Thanks for watching. Please do well to subscribe to this channel. We share new African tales every week, and when you support us, it helps us continue sharing these real human experiences.